Every so often on a Tuesday evening, we like to welcome a guest to Weather World, and tonight's is a distinguished alum of the Department of Meteorology. Dr. Paul Tagg received his BS, MS, and PhD degrees from Penn State University, worked as a research scientist for more than 30 years before leaving his job and turning to a full-time career as a writer. So we welcome Dr. Paul Tagg, meteorologist and author, to Weather World. So Paul, tell us a little bit about your meteorological career before you turned to writing.
After I received my master's in 1968, I went to work for the Navy Weather Research Facility in Norfolk, Virginia. I was a research meteorologist. Unfortunately, in 1971, we were closed down as part of the defense cuts, and our operation got moved to Monterey, California. And that's where I spent the rest of my career, where I retired in 2001.
And how did the transition from meteorologist to writer occur? I mean, had you been writing on the side for a while or tucking some ideas away?
I've always liked the idea of fiction, and I love movies and make-believe. But about 5 years before I retired, I took it seriously and I started to write short stories, which is an excellent way to any up-and-coming author, if you want to write fiction, to do. I did that for a number of years, learned the art of storytelling, and then after I retired, I spent 1 year, that's all I did was write short stories, and then I took off with my first novel.
Which is called Category 5.
Yes.
And Category 5 as in hurricanes. Tell us a little bit about the plot there and where you got the idea.
Well, because I was a meteorologist, I wanted to include meteorology, if I could, in my first novel. And after a lot of thinking, we decided to use hurricanes. Category 5, of course, is the strongest hurricane. And came up with a concept of using a laser from space to control hurricanes. And although that's an incredible premise, it's plausible. We know that hurricanes respond to water temperatures. And so the thought is you'd have big enough laser to heat the water, and then you could control and move hurricanes. So the bad guys get that going.
Okay. And how much carryover then? Obviously there has to be some from your meteorological to your writing career, but what about, say, characters or situations or locations? How much of that shows up in the thrillers?
Yes. My character, Dr. Victor Mark Silverstein, is he's a bigger-than-life guy, but he went to Penn State. He was a genius. He graduated with a PhD here, and so a lot of the book actually starts here with you have character. It's a character-driven book as well as a plot-driven. So there are problems he had with his roommate, very bad things happened here on campus, and so yes, he started here, and then he ended up transitioning. He went to work in Monterey, which is where I worked.
I see. So is there a little bit of you in Dr. Silverstein?
Not much.
Not much.
I think it's a combination of a lot of people. People ask, was that somebody? You know, you draw from your memory, and so there's a little bit of everyone.
Now, your second novel, which is called Prophecy, really didn't have a central weather theme to it, but you did manage to work in the 1889 Johnstown flood into the book.
That's correct. If anyone lives here in Pennsylvania, go to the flood memorial, because it's very impressive what happened. That was one of the major environmental disasters ever to befall the United States. Over 2,000 people died. Anyway, it was such an emotional experience. I thought, well, I have to include that concept in the book, and it's how Prophecy starts out.
I see. And tell us a little bit about the message of that book, or the plot.
I couldn't think of another meteorological theme at that time to base a thriller around, so I came up with this one goes off into the genome and genetics, and the concept is that every couple 100 million births you end up with someone with a special gene that gets clicked on that has prophetic qualities to it, and so it explains a lot of things in history and the like, and that's what the whole story revolves around. That.
Tell us a little bit about how much you worry about getting the science right in your books, and what about the reader not knowing when the science ends and the fiction begins?
I very much want the science to be correct. When I went into the genome and genetics, I read books, and because I wasn't as familiar as with meteorology. But even with meteorology, I had to get details. But you worry about that, and sometimes people do take it as a work of fiction. And I make that clear in the beginning of the book. But some people think, well, gee, that's going on, or there are conspiracy theories that could be going on.
Right. I understand that in your next novel you kind of return to your meteorological roots. It's a backdrop dealing with global climate change. Tell us a little bit about that project.
After the second book, I said I had to get back to meteorology because those are my roots. And so global climate change is the topic of the decade. And my primary reader and I, Robin Brody, we sat down for months coming up with a concept. And so, but there's no subtlety in my global climate change in the book. The bad guys are out to do us in. And so it's a thriller based upon global climate change.
Dr. Paul Tagg, meteorologist, writer, thank you for stopping by.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll be back in a moment with a recap of the short-range forecast.